All right, here we are. So today is not Tuesday, March 11th for those watching this video. We're pre-recording this because we've got some other commitments Friday, so we'll set this one to schedule. But we're still doing it live the way we do it anyways. Just hit
That's true.
record. Here we are. So, um, yeah, I got a bunch of things I'd love to talk about, but you've got something on your docket. But as always, before we start, what's been going on this week for you? I mean,
Um, well, because I'm going out of town over the weekend, I needed to get my paper written for my Four Worlds class. So I worked on that all weekend. And then yesterday I worked on the outline for my Living from Soul book, and I got that done,
hmm,
uh, along with some of the charts for today, which I was thinking it would be interesting to talk about the World Trade Center explosion, 9/11,
oh,
and the astrology, since Catherine de Jersey in her Appointment with Destiny book talked about the vulnerability of that building to explosions and to having a bad end.
okay,
So
definitely up for
some
talking
of
about.
the astrology is pretty interesting.
Cool. Well, we'll definitely talk about that, but you've already given me a question to ask. When you do your outline, what is your process? Does it just flow out of you? Do you mind map? Do you journal? When you say outline, you mean you're putting together the high level talking pieces for something that you'll then expand upon. Is that what you mean by outline? Yeah.
Yes, well, the Living from Soul book is stories from my life of transformative moments, especially ones that came out of soul. And I made most of the decisions in my life that way, even as a child. So I want it to be an inspiring book for other people. And um, I have a deadline on it of handing in a draft by the end of April
Oh,
because
wow.
I'm actually publishing it through She Rises Studio. So I had one of my assistants pull all of the stories that I had told in Manifest Your Dreams webinars from my life out of the transcripts.
Mm.
And she sent those to me in a Google Doc. So I went through the Google Doc and I added exercises for people to do, commentary on it, why it was important, how it was transformable. And I began to get a feel for how to play with that material and turn it into a book.
How long have you been doing the Manifest Your Dreams webinar? I've known about it for over
Two
a
years,
2 years. Okay, cool.
2 years this month.
Oh, wow. Cool.
And I think we've only missed one webinar.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, I think I told you the other day, like I come for the webinar, but I definitely come for the attunements. There's something about starting the day off that way that I definitely appreciate. So,
I usually come up with some pretty good attunements.
mhm. Um, yeah. Do you want to jump on the trade center thing? I also need to let Willow in. I've got a bit of a predicament here. This room is my sister-in-law is staying here. There's a cat named Howie, and he's under the blankets there, and he won't come out. And he's not impressed by the dog, but the dogs want in as well. So I may need to manage the pet scene, but so the World Trade Center. Um, yeah, how do you want to start?
I think I'll start with Catherine de Jersey's um, description of it.
Okay.
And um, what she said early on in it is quite interesting. I was looking when the World Trade Center happened, I was teaching human design. And I was teaching on Friday nights about transits. So we were looking and studying it from that standpoint. So I was actually looking for my own transcripts of it. And when I told Katie that I was doing that, she said, "Oh, you have to go to my book because was expected that the building would not stand."
Mm.
And so, of course, I pulled out her chapter and I actually gave it as a handout to all my students.
So her book, because I haven't got to that section yet, but she's not actually referring in that book to 2001 then. She's referring to
No,
bombing in
no,
the
the book was published in 1995.
right. So we're talking
And
about
then remember, she died in 2005.
the
And at the point at which that explosion happened, she was not healthy at all.
Mm,
She had Parkinson's and she had fallen and broken her hip. And she lived alone in the Hancock. So she ended up getting full-time live-in help.
mm,
But she certainly was not um, going to work on the astrology of it
mm,
much. Anyhow, she said, astrology is not limited to the interpretation of people and their lives. It can be applied to businesses, restaurants, and even buildings. A chart will give clues to its personality, its problems, just as it does for a human being. Of course, a building is not a human being, but it is alive in its own way, created by the spirit, the genius, and sometimes, unhappily, the ruthlessness of those involved.
mm.
Thus, it has its own personality. And then she talks about learning about that. She says, I learned this lesson the hard way. When a beautiful new high rise in Chicago went up, I was so enthralled by its design, created by a talented and famous architect, that I failed to calculate its chart before I signed the lease. With its view and balconies overlooking the river, it was breathtaking. My architect brother was enthralled. As he entered my apartment, he said he seemed to be already outside as it opened onto my balcony with the river and bridge below. By that time, I'd acquired a good reputation in my field, and the building owners were delighted to have me as one of their early tenants. Happy with my new apartment, I offered to do an astrological chart of the building. My heart sank when I saw it. The chart was terrible, describing the fiasco. Through its design, though its design was marvelous, the materials which had gone into the construction was shoddy. So she moves on to say that as soon as she could, she got out of that building. Oh, let me send Marvin. Can you, Sean, send Marvin a text with the invite to this?
Uh, because it's pre-recorded, it's set to I think, yeah, I think I might be able to send him a link still. Okay.
Phone or email.
Um, I think a text.
Yeah. Let me see what I can do here. I think because we're not publishing it live right now, the link may not work, but I'll try.
So not important. Why don't you just sit in the room
Yeah.
over there? Okay, you don't need to. He'll just sit in a corner. Um, so she talks about how when she read about the Hancock building going up, she was absolutely delighted. She did its chart, and when you do the building, the chart of a building, you do it for what's called the topping off. that's the chart for the moment the building was finished.
Hmm.
Because that's the birth of the building. Now,
So I have a question about that.
if we were to do it, which I did do, using noble energy maps, I haven't looked at them yet. But what I did in preparation for thinking about it today was to do the noble energy maps for the topping off of the world trade, the first explosion, which happened, it was a bomb in the basement, and it happened in 1993. And Katie talked about those two events in her book, Destiny Times 6. And she told me in 2001, I was teaching transits in a Friday night seminar um, using human design. And we were going to look at the charts of the world trade. Now, if we had just looked at the one, we would have missed the explosion.
Mhm.
So what Katie did was when I said, I'm looking at the astrology of the world trade bombing, she said, go to my book and look at the charts for the world trade. It was bound to happen. It was not meant to stand. So she actually lived in the Hancock building on the 53rd floor. And she said when the building was built, it was a panoramic view of the city, spectacular, and the world trade. And it was the upper floors had a restaurant which was booked out for months. And the tenants came from all over the world. And the address was a very prestigious address. But the building, she says, had a hidden weakness, what she would have diagnosed as a dormant illness in a person, maybe a virus. And she said this became evident after the terrorist bomb exploded on February 26, 1993, wreaking havoc. 6 people were killed and thousands injured in a harrowing hours afterwards. The electricity was knocked out, elevators halted between floors, leaving frightened occupants huddled in the smoky, it halted between floors, leaving frightened occupants huddled in smoky dark, gasping for air. And a group of school children were among those trapped. The building engineer happened to be in one of the elevators. So she goes on to talk about remembering this engineer remembering that the walls were made of gypsum rather than of concrete. So they were able to break through and get out. The bomb exploded in the basement garage, leaving a huge crater about 125 feet in diameter in which victims were trapped. So you use the date when the building was finished or born and the time of the explosion. And she calculated a chart. So I have the charts and I will share my screen.
Cool. The topping off of a building, is that a ceremony or is it a particular piece of paperwork that occurs or
I think it
how
could be
does
any
you know
of
how that
those
works?
one. I think, it really depends on where you are and what your relationship is. I mean, if you build an office building, Um, I think, if it's big enough and worth enough money, maybe you have a ceremony or a party to open the building.
Right, but it's different than getting, say, an occupancy permit, I guess. It's more of a like the building is completed because then there's all the paperwork and everyone involved. So okay.
I Yeah, the topping off of the building is when the building is done. So it would be move-in condition.
Okay.
Um, so I want to look first. This is the mandala synthesis, as I call it. And I'm going to look not just at the astrology, but also at the noble energy maps. And it'll be interesting to put those together with the astrology and to also be able to see 3 months before the building was born and 3 months after the building was born, and to also be able to see the spiritual component of the building.
Mhm.
So the mandala synthesis codes the tree of life at the center, along with chakras, the astrology around the wheel, and then each astrological sign correlates to a line of the hexagram of the I-Ching. And those are put into an image. I think this will be big enough. And the way the noble energy maps work is we have the actual date of the topping off, and then we have based on that date, 3 months before and 3 months after. And because I look at the mental world, the spiritual world, the emotional world, and the physical world, it's very interesting to look at that, whereas in astrology, we only basically use the one chart.
Mhm.
So the one chart would be only what's in black in this first design. And that would make it a projector in the human design sequence because you would not have the prenatal calculated in. And so it would be a generator. The root defined to the splenic center, defined to the sacral center, and that's it.
Right.
In the way I see it, there's so much more. It's very interesting to me that the spiritual is very much self-contained. And given that we use Chiron, we have the heart center connecting to the throat center. Sam, quiet. Um, what might that mean? Well, it makes it, if we look at the human design chart, it's a triple split definition. And you'd almost think that in being born, the conceptualization of what it was didn't fully connect with the guts of the building,
Mhm.
that there's a split there. And we can see that there's a strong component of needing to be cared for. And we know from Catherine that the building was not cared for. That she does say that I will read it. using the date the building was finished, born, and the time of the explosion. So let me just show you the astrology chart before I read this, because she's going to be referring to this chart, and she's going to be referring to the World Trade explosion in 1993. And then she's going to later, I'm going to refer to the one for the 9/11. But
Okay.
here is the topping off and the explosion. So this is what Catherine de Jersey is referring to. And then I did an additional, I don't know if I did. I didn't do the progression for this, but we certainly could do it. It would be very interesting. Because here we have, I wanted just the, let's see, 2001 explosion, just this one. Okay, make it one notch smaller. Can you see that okay?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, make sure it's good in the stream too.
So I'll point out what Catherine is talking about. Using the date the building was finished, 1972, and the time of the explosion, February 1993, I calculated a chart which was revealing. The center, meaning this, oh, wait a minute. This is a tri-wheel. I want the bi-wheel. I thought I did a bi-wheel for it. Did I not? No, I didn't. Okay, so you're going to have to look at the the inner wheel and the second wheel. The third wheel is the 2001.
Okay.
So Katie is only working with the center wheel and the second wheel, and I'll fill in the rest. The center has the sun in Scorpio over here, the sun and the moon are both in Scorpio. A fitting sign for a building of such magnitude that cynical reporters called it Governor Nelson Rockefeller's edifice symbolic of tenacity and endurance, the survivor. Scorpio is a sign of extremes. The World Trade Center was certainly that when it was erected. The impact of both the sun and the moon in Scorpio emphasizes the independence, the pride in the majesty of it, the self-centered arrogance that marked the attitude of those in charge. The World Trade Center was the best, and as the old slogan goes, might makes right. For example, a client once told her that her Scorpio ex-fiance said to her, this is a client of Katie's, "You're smart, but I'm a genius." Scorpio suggests majesty, something hidden. Moreover, the time of the opening concurred with the dark of the moon, just before the moon joins the sun. So the second rung has the sun here, and the moon, where is the moon? The moon is here.
The 11th house is Cancer, isn't it?
What?
11th house is Cancer.
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm just testing my memory as I've been trying to learn lately.
The sun was in Pisces on February 26th, And the moon looks like it's in Taurus. I didn't do the chart. She didn't print the chart. I did the chart for her. The charts in her book are charts that I ran for her. Well, let's just keep reading. Just before the moon joins the sun. The union is not strong yet, so the energy is not fully developed. This is a scientific and astronomical fact, as well as an astrological one. The flaw was revealed later when it came out that the basement garage, which was accessible to the public, had never been bomb-proofed. There were reasons. I don't think I'll read all of that. She says there were a lot of hidden, the only precaution was that the structure must be strong enough, this is interesting, to withstand the force of being struck by an airplane, if that should ever happen. The essential strength of the structure did mitigate the effects of the bomb, although that was a fortunate side effect. But there was the hidden factors that made the Twin Towers vulnerable. It was not under jurisdiction of the city or the state. So it was that when in 1986, consultants told the Port Authority that the below ground parking made the building vulnerable to terrorism, nothing was done, even though a 6-story parking garage at Kennedy Airport, completed in 1991, had been bomb-proofed. It came to light that the building was arrogantly managed. Also, Scorpion. She basically is saying that the topping off had hidden weaknesses. So she did look at the topping off, and I did do the topping, the topping off of the progressed ascent of the topping off with the progression of the topping off to February 26th, 1993, when the explosion happened, is what Katie talked about next. You can see that the progressed ascendant, 3 degrees of Cancer, is squaring the midheaven when that happened. And it was joining, she says, the moon at birth. So the moon is here, was joined to Uranus here in the explosion chart. So it's very interesting. When we look at this chart, if you're not an astrologer and you're looking at a chart like this, what you can immediately see is that in the 5th and the 6th house, in the 7th house, in the 10th house, in the ascendant, there are connections between the progress chart and the natal chart. So you don't have to know astrology to see a pattern and to say to yourself, there must be something here. And it's pretty interesting that, to me, that the Uranus-Jupiter is right coming up. Well, Jupiter is right on the 8th house cusp, and Uranus is coming up to it. and Neptune is coming up to it. Neptune and Uranus are conjunct, and they're opposite the progressed ascendant, both the progressed, secondary progressed, and the solar arc. That's not going to mean anything to the people who are not astrologers, but some of the listeners may be astrologers and they'll know what that means. What it means is that you could expect something unexpected to impact the resources and the reputation of this building at this time when the explosion happened. Now, the sad thing about it is that it wasn't taken seriously enough.
Mhm.
And there was not enough protection and security for how the building was being handled. But going further, the Chiron is 13 degrees of Aries in the 10th house. Now, the 10th house is what comes before the public. What is this building healing for the public? Or is it challenging for the public? Looking at it cold, let's say I looked at it when it was first born, I would have seen potential in it. But it also is saying it has a destiny, a strong destiny. We could read into it. What is that destiny? We know retrospectively that the 13-degree Chiron and in conjunct to the sun in Scorpio and to the in opposition to Uranus and the Mars, we would expect that something unexpected would happen to this building. If I were doing a reading on this particular chart, I would have said to the person, if it was a person's chart, you may be surprised at either something challenging that comes in front of you that will make you consider what you're doing and if it's really the right path for you. Now, if we go back to the that's 2001. So if we just we're looking at this chart, which is the topping off chart, and we can see in the, tell me, Sean, if I'm jumping around too much for understanding, because I tend to do that.
I mean, I'm always a little perplexed still about the astrology, but I'm following you.
Okay.
Can I ask a question about what you're about to show? I mean, that's the composite or the total integrated vehicle. But
This is the composite of the topping off.
yeah. Now,
Sam,
because it's a building, do I pay attention to
wait a minute. My dog's a barking. Okay, go.
because it's a building, am I paying attention to all the gates or only the black ones still?
Um,
And the reason I say that is, I mean, look at that central column. It's just packed. But I don't know if I should be just not paying attention to that right now or not.
well, I would use it in this format
Okay.
because as an astrologer, you don't make a distinction between a chart for a building versus a chart for a human or a chart for an animal. You look at the whole chart and you look at the aspects. Now we're looking at multiple charts here,
Mhm.
and we're looking at a building that could have had so much more potential than what it ended up doing. Why? Because look at the open solar plexus.
Mhm.
Now, that could have been a clue. So we looked at that chart. Then this is the explosion chart. Look at how the solar plexus is defined everywhere.
Mm.
Somebody wanted to blow it up. It was an emotional vendetta against the building. Now, the building didn't have a problem on its own, right? The building didn't just suddenly collapse, despite it being shoddily built.
Mhm.
That could have been repaired had there been some ethics involved in it. And I think ultimately that would have happened because the building had a strong soul. It wasn't nurtured.
Mm.
And the emotional reactions of the people taking care of it. I mean, what happened on the explosion, clearly anybody, even basic human design people, would know it was an emotional situation.
Mhm.
And um, here we have, now look at how the three Satsuma, the three central column, not colored in at all.
Mhm.
But Chiron from the 731, it's almost like it was a warning. You know, if they had paid attention,
Mhm.
maybe the outcome would have been different. Now, here is the,
Well, there's lots of speculation around that whole event of people that weren't paying attention or so. Mhm.
now here, as we saw in the tri-wheel, we have Saturn as 22 of Aquarius, a lot of 22s. We have the sun in Pisces right on the midheaven. What does that mean? It was not, they were not clear about what was happening.
Mhm.
They didn't take it seriously enough. They didn't protect the building. The Jupiter on the fifth house cusp is saying this could be good for the building. It was such an interesting warning. You know, when you look at a chart or you look at your life and things happen that are challenges, if you look at it from the standpoint of what is the lesson in it? What do I need to learn from it? You do not see it as a negative. And look in this chart at the Grand Trine. A Grand Trine means a very nice aspect, Chiron in Leo, to Venus within 2 degrees in Aries, to the North Node in the 6th house in Sagittarius, also 17 degrees. That is beautiful. So Katie was reading it as this was not unexpected for the building. But look at the beautiful warning it was giving. You had a question, Sean.
I just wanted to make sure this, so the date for this one, this is the actual explosion,
Bombing
the
in
bomb,
1993.
bombing in 93. Got it. Okay.
So it's as though the building had a fault, had a, as Katie said, an inherent virus. It was discovered when this explosion happened in the basement that there was a problem. And look at the beautiful aspects that would have served as a warning to make it right. And yet, because it was ignored, we have 9/11. What do you see, Sean? You like reading charts. What do you see?
Well, I mean, you already pointed out the defined solar plexus. Um, Everything about that event was emotional. I think from the attackers to the people that were suffered from it, it was the whole thing was a hot mess. Um, what do I see?
Look at the fact that um, you have the 515
Mhm.
and the 10. And what was so impressive about that day? Where's the 46? Here's the 46,
Yeah.
and here's the 29. So that's, I mean, what was so interesting about the day and about what people remember about the day, aside from the trauma of it, which for America, it was the first time that there was ever an attack from outside on American soil. So the American people woke up in a new way. And what's so interesting is the 4629 is all postnatal. But it's also interesting that the 515 exists in every single chart. And what we learned was how much the people who were on the ground went out of their way to rescue the people who were inside.
Mhm.
And what it showed was the humanity and the caring. And people came from all over
Mhm.
to help rescue people, to find bodies of people. And you see that here in the valuing of life, the fact that you have the 12th hexagram, the 19th hexagram, the 27th hexagram, all in, oh shit. Sorry, Marvin just spilled something. I have to walk away for a few minutes.
Yeah, no worries.
What do you want to tell me?
Listen, I didn't. Your still. Sorry about that. Nothing wrong.
Can you wipe up my desk?
Nelson Rockefeller.
Watch one of these up here. Doo, doo, doo. There you go. Do that like, share, and subscribe thing.
Cannot. You give my address to Marvin.
Yes.
Hi, quick change.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay.
Yeah, so a couple things as you're talking about this. So arguably it wasn't the first attack on American soil, because I guess Pearl Harbor would have been the first one, right? It may have been a different kind of event, different
It
time.
wasn't on the main ground,
In North America.
you know.
Yeah. Um, it would almost be interesting to compare that at some point because, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm a huge conspiracy theorist, but certainly the 9/11 event caught my attention way back at the time because I was close to it. Um, but it seems like there was lots of warning about Pearl Harbor, and there was lots of warning potentially about this attack that was ignored, right? And so, like, was it intentional ignorance? Was it, it's, in both cases, it led to being re-entered, like to enter
Well,
war. And
there's a lot of political stuff, and as I said, at the time that this happened, um, when the World Trade Center was built, um, it was, I lost my place here, hold on. As I said, people were calling it Rockefeller's edifice.
Mm.
And so there was, when you talk about something in that kind of political way, it's telling you that it's a deep state involvement.
Mhm.
It's not just one politician or one person like that. There was a lot of, obviously, the state was not willing to step in even after the bombing to say the building needs to be secured.
Mm.
So what was the reason for that? Who knows? All we can look at is the astrology, the charts, and make sense out of looking at it retrospectively. What do we see here that might inform us in the future?
Mhm.
And it's very interesting to look at the noble energy maps and to see the strength, the potential of the building
Mhm.
and the possibilities that it had, and then to see what happened. And obviously from the explosion chart, I don't think it needed to happen.
Mhm.
Yes, astrologically everything hit, but looking at that day, maybe it could have been prevented. And then when we look at 9/11, again, we're looking at a strong emotional side. We're looking at the 12th gate. We're looking at the 515. We're looking at the 19, the 27, all the caring that came about in the mental world after the explosion.
Mhm.
And we're looking here, the 4629 postnatal. So the aftermath. So here we're looking at explosions. Remember, we're looking at a 3-month period in noble energy maps. If we only want to look at the day, we would only be looking at the first 4 charts.
Right.
And not the postnatal charts, which are showing us the aftermath. And we can see in the aftermath of the explosion, there was still things missing. There was no connection to the core.
Mhm.
If I was looking at a relationship where this was the chart of the relationship, I would be wondering whether that relationship was really a caretaking one. And we know from Catherine that the building was not taken care of.
Mhm.
So then when we get to the actual explosion, I mean, 9/11, and I think I did a tri-wheel of the three. Pretty interesting. Explosion is in the middle, and then the 9/11 is on the outside. And you can see Saturn on the south node, the moon coming up to the progressed ascendants. It's interesting that Jupiter is in the first house. Now, sometimes Jupiter can be very beneficent, but it can also wake people up. So, what is expansive? Is it always good, or is it sometimes challenging?
Mhm.
So explosion, Pluto in Scorpio, right on the sixth house cusp. They didn't pay attention. And then we have 4 planets. Pluto was already moved into Sagittarius. 4 planets on the sixth house impacting the building. So I guess I have some additional, this was topping off to 93. And here's the topping, the progression of the World Trade explosion in 2001. Look at how everything
Mhm.
is chock full in the fifth and sixth house. As you would expect in a office building, focused when the people are in it, they're all focused on work.
Mhm.
Midheaven with Chiron. Whoop. The midheaven is right smack on the building's Chiron. And we even have a conjunction between midheaven and Chiron for the explosion. And then on the outside wheel, the transits, we have the node on the ascendant. We have Saturn in the 12th house, like the lessons behind the scene. And have we learned from it? Are we
So
building buildings that can withstand explosions? Are we taking care of people in these buildings? Have we learned from it?
that was the thought that came to mind about 15 minutes ago, and it jumped in my head. Like the Titanic, when it happened, lots of things changed, right? Safety around communications and the SOS system was all of a sudden sort of
There are some
starting to be
things about the
adopted.
Titanic that have come to light recently
But
about,
like even just the lifeboats, right? And one thing I remember from 9/11, and to my knowledge, I don't think we've learned from it, was that the communication systems between the fire department, police department were all separate. And so they couldn't actually effectively communicate with each other. And
Mhm.
because that industry is like sometimes it's almost competitive, right? About keeping your job. So everyone races to the scene and it's all about caring, but is it, or is it about, filling quotas? So yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if what we
We
learned.
can't take any of these events on a surface level. We are not in the know, and I'm certainly not in a position to ever be in the know. in terms of the political scene that was going on at the time and the
Mhm.
power and the intricacies of who the players were and what their intent was.
Mhm.
And I think that's still the case, that we now know that there's a lot of corruption and a lot of waste in government. We've always known that. And the question is, are people now awake enough for it to change? If they're not, the world may not exist that much longer in its current form.
Mm. Yeah. Well, its current form is shifting rapidly. Yeah. Hmm.
So I don't think I need to say more about the World Trade Center. I think that it's interesting to look at the astrology of these things.
Hmm.
I I think you can avoid things if you are skilled enough. And um, certainly when I listened to Catherine de Jersey about signing a lease on an office, and she said to me, "Well, dear, I don't want you to sign that lease because you're going to move."
Hmm.
And I said, "Katie, you're crazy. I've just unpacked 12 years of books. Why would I move?" And I had such a beautiful office in Chicago. It was
Hmm.
um, on North Michigan Avenue, on an upper floor so I could see the lake. And I used some good decorators. And actually, the desk I'm sitting on is the same desk I had in my office when I first set it up in 1974.
Ah,
So
it's a
I
real.
have a very beautiful office,
Mhm.
um, and the same pieces of furniture are in my office now. In fact, the same chair. So, um, yeah, you could when I was getting ready to sign a lease, Katie picked the date. When my kids got married, I picked the date. And when you pick a date, you look for the kinds of things that were not looked for in the World Trade Center.
Mhm.
The conjunction, where the moon is, what the aspects are, if it's a relationship, how they fit together. And if it was a building, I'd want to know if it fit with the builder.
Mhm. Yeah, I think you've kind of said a few times, like, so I want to make sure I'm saying this correctly, but like we don't want to use astrology to be predictive because it's thematic. It's not a surety thing, but it's probably beneficial to pay attention. Um, and there's value in looking back. I mean, that's how we learn, reinforce for ourselves
Well,
that there.
when you look back, I would say the lay public or even novice astrologer looking back is not going to gain a lot looking at the charts.
Mhm.
You can always make up a story. Much more valuable is going through your life and looking at the events of your life and journaling about paths taken and paths not taken. Uh, to me, that's one of the most powerful exercises you can do
Mhm.
because very often uh, my clients will regret something or be traumatized by something and they beat themselves up about it. Whereas it wasn't necessarily that they made the wrong choice. Maybe they didn't handle things as well as they could. But I think it's valuable to think about what would have happened if you had taken a different course of action.
Mhm.
And
For- It looks like our connection is cutting out a bit here, so hopefully you can hear me. But
what?
the connection is dropping a little bit here, so it's getting a bit choppy. But
That's choppy here too. And my dogs are
okay.
barking.
So for someone watching this, I mean, there's a new World Trade Center in the same location, right? And it's got the same kind of, it's probably going to have the same kind of triggering for people outside of the country, right? Like it ultimately was a great big USA emblem and was a target, right? So, the same sort of thing exists there. I think it made sense to make it let me use the wrong word. It's not shrine. um a memorial for the lives lost. But they've gone and put another massive, massive
I
ego
haven't
thing.
looked at the topping off of that building. And you asked me a week or two ago about astrocartography. It's the same thing. When you're dealing with astrology, you need the exact time and the exact place. A lot of times when you're dealing with a city or a state or a building, you don't get exact data.
Mhm,
Garbage in, garbage out.
mhm,
You cannot rely on it. I think personally that everyone is better off asking themselves what feels right for them, what aligns with them. Uh, the astrology can look great and it can feel shitty,
mhm,
and vice versa. So you have to live by your own knowing. And of course, my famous phrase, when you know what you know because you know it, and nobody can tell you you don't know it, don't compromise. And you're not
mhm,
selfish, and you're not self-centered, and you're not pig-headed, any of those things.
mhm,
And it would be great if parents never labeled their children. That's a roadblock to communication and to mental health, is
mhm,
blaming people, labeling people, accusing people. They're all absolute roadblocks to communication.
mhm,
So, I think it's really fun to do the astrology. It's fun to look at charts. It's fun to look at my own chart. My granddaughter called me early last week, over the weekend, and said, would I look at her chart and see when she's going to find a boyfriend? And I did, and I told her. And I can usually pretty accurate on that stuff. Uh, but she could override it.
Yeah, and overriding it is neither right nor wrong. It's just what information she had at the time. Yeah. Hmm. Um, yeah, it's gotten really choppy. It's weird. I can actually hear everything you're saying, but your lips, your head's bouncing around like a puppet. So
Should we stop?
we could. Um,
If it's not going to be a good connection,
well, the amazing thing is the audio seems fine. The audio hasn't really shifted. It's just the video is seems off. Well, I'll tell you what, I do want to ask you a couple of questions, and it's
okay,
nothing to do with what we've been talking about. Um, so here they are in order. The first one, you've talked about heart and mind coherence, and you've asked me a few times about a device, and you've asked enough times that I'm now paying attention again. So, what was it called, and what is it specifically intended to do and help with?
there are two that I recommend. One is neorhythm, and the other is Apollo Neuro. The
Oh, neuro.
neorhythm, the Apollo Neuro comes as a wearable. I have one on my ankle.
Mm.
That's the Apollo Neuro.
And you had
You
it on
can,
your ankle.
I keep
Okay.
it on my ankle. Um, and I wear it when I sleep. And during the day, I have it on Smart Vibes. So at night, it's on Sleep Vibes. It shifts. It's a PEMF frequency, which is known to be very healing. And I sit on a PEMF mat,
Hmm.
which is from Neorhythm. Neorhythm makes a headband that you can meditate with. And the Apollo Neuro is just the wearable ankle or wrist bracelet. And it has smart vibes, so you can wear it as much as you want.
And
Um,
I think I wore it at your house briefly, and I don't remember there being much of a sensation to it. So it's just quietly working away in the background, or like are there times when you sense what it's doing more than others?
you set the frequency.
Mhm.
So the frequency can be 100%. So you feel it. Um, feel it pretty strongly. And it can be set so you don't feel it at all. And it does not make a difference in the frequency of the wave.
Mm.
So I keep it
And
on so I don't feel it.
okay, and the intention of it is are you striving for calm? Like it's a balancing thing?
Well, it can be, or it can be for focus, for energy, for recovery, for sleep, for then different, I don't know all of the settings. Um,
Right.
I have used it. I started using it when I broke my upper arm in three places. And in 2013, I had broken my clavicle. So my clavicle never healed properly because I didn't have surgery on it. It was marginal. So when I broke my arm in three places, dogs knocked me over. Um, the orthopedist told me that my clavicle had not healed properly, and we really wanted to make sure this healed properly. So I sat, I I could not even bend my arm. That it was hanging. It was just really very broken. And I sat with the Apollo Neuro, uh, I believe on my ankle, and I kept my arm in a Thermatech um, heating pad, which is infrared heating. And I used the neorhythm. I was sitting on the neorhythm using a Thermatech on my arm along with the Apollo. And it healed in record time. Oh, and of course, I was doing Reiki nonstop.
Yeah.
So it healed to the point that the orthopedist said to Marvin when Marvin went in for something, "How's your wife doing? She healed her arm in record time." I don't know if she did that, but I had some help.
Yeah. So my next question is about Reiki, actually. Um, so I do my symbols. I do some self Reiki. You have said on a few times that sometimes you do the symbols and they come so fast, you almost can't keep up with it, or something to
Right.
that effect. And I've kind of experienced that as well lately, like to the point where like I'm no longer, I don't think I've needed convincing that there's anything that Reiki isn't real. But there are times where it's like, ooh, I really felt that, and other times where it's just seems like just nothing. And so I guess one of my questions is there a right time to do Reiki? And is there a time where I'm forcing it or the
No,
intention's not there? Because
no,
there are times where I've even tried to do the symbols and
you're
I've felt
the
resistance.
vehicle through which it's flowing.
Mhm.
You're not always the same.
True.
And you will respond according to what's going on with yourself.
Hmm.
Reiki is going to flow. The Reiki is not, it's the same thing with the PEMF wave. Whether you have it on 0, well, not 0, 10, frequency of 10 versus 95%, it doesn't matter. The frequency is still going into your body. You don't have to feel it
Hmm.
to know that it's working. So it's almost like the volume on a radio.
Hmm.
You turn it on and the voice is going, but you might not be in the bandwidth width to hear what it's saying. But it doesn't mean it's not being said.
Okay. Yeah, I'd like to explore that a bit more. So, because there are times where, and the reality is if I'm as clean a channel, like I'm in the right mood, I've done some qigong, I can feel the energy moving. Um, I would say the Reiki
That's for
feels more
you.
intense.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's for you. It feels more intense. It is not more intense. The frequency of Reiki is the same frequency. It's a frequency of divine light. You're adjusting its volume, but the transmission occurs the same.
Mm. Isn't it
So,
interesting that we're trying to talk topic and I can't hear a word you're saying because it's breaking up? It's very, very interesting. Yeah, this connection's become terrible.
okay, I think we should
Can you?
wind it up because obviously it's not going to be a good transmission.
No. Yeah, I'm gonna close this off. Let's just see. Let's see what happens.